Good morning and welcome to our latest live webinar where we look at whether now is the right time to upgrade. Firstly, thank you so much for joining. So before we get started, my name is Elliot Jones and I'm joined by leading industry experts Rafael Bloom, Rob May and Neil Cattermull. So gentlemen, thank you for joining. Before we continue, I think it might be worthwhile just a quick introduction. So, Raf, if we could start with you, a quick intro. Yeah, welcome.
Thanks a lot and good morning. Thank you very much. So yes, I'm Rafi Bloom. I've worked with data and technology since the late 1990s. I worked for Bloomberg for about 11 years, and I have occupied the enterprise data space for some time, dealing with information governance and the reaction to legislation like MiFID II, and latterly, of course, things like the GDPR. And I also write about all of this, so I'm fascinated with tech, data, and the future, and I like to talk about it. Hence, I guess that's why I'm here.
Thank you so much, Rafi. So, Rob, if you wouldn't mind a quick introduction as well.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So my name's Rob May. I run an organisation called Ramsack, where I'm the founder and the managing director there, and have been for the last 32 years. We're a team of just over 100 consultants looking at technology and IT services and support, cybersecurity. And I'm a speaker. I go around the world speaking on cybersecurity and privacy, and like Raf, all things around GDPR and all that good thing.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rob. And Neil, yourself, please.
Yeah, I'm Rob's brother from a different mother. We do look similar, but apart from the shirts. But no. So I've been around in technology for all my life, really. So from various banking institutions, some top level positions, to forming my own consultancy companies and that really, and traveling all around the world talking about it, blogging about it, making lots of videos about it, and yeah, and onward and upward, as I say.
Perfect. Thank you so much, gentlemen. So, yeah, and myself, my name is Elliot Jones. I work in the marketing team at Kingston Technology, but I've worked in the tech industry for around 15 years or so, enough time to see the wild and wonderful within technology. But super excited today to bring you on to this webinar and really kind of looking into the merits of upgrading versus replacing corporate PCs, but also having a look at the key considerations that you should make when it comes to getting basically the best out of your existing hardware or your existing system. So I think given kind of wider factors and then drawing into more specific within the technology industry, we're in a position where many organizations have devices, laptops that were purchased perhaps at the start of the pandemic a few years ago, where there was this big rush to acquire devices to facilitate home working. Now we're kind of 3 years hence from there, and kind of devices are coming to their natural end of the kind of conventional wisdom IT life cycle. So organizations have got a couple of choices. Do they buy new, or can they get more out of those devices that that they have previously purchased? And I think the other factor that we should consider, and we'll touch on a little bit today, is that given the relative price of memory and storage, a lot of organizations are using that to go, actually, it's a good opportunity to actually upgrade our devices rather than the considerable increase. However, it may not be right for everyone, and that's what we want to have a look at today and discuss those merits. So before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. So for those that are joining us live, we do have a Q&A section that is beside there, so feel free to ask any questions. We'll endeavour to cover them at the end of this discussion. We also have our latest ebook that both Neil and Rafi contributed to, so feel free, but more than welcome to download that, where we go into it a bit more depth in terms of the merits of upgrade versus replace, not only for laptop but also touching on server too. And lastly, we do have a poll question that's coming up quite shortly, so we would love for you to get involved with that. So yeah, we look forward to the answers that we receive, and we'll be reacting to those live as well. So firstly, gentlemen, I think before we get started, I think it's important to really lean into the importance of identifying the purpose and the usage of any laptop or PC within an organization. And Rafi, if I can come to you, what are your thoughts? How can people that are looking to making the decision between upgrade versus replace, how important is identifying that purpose, and what can they do in order to achieve success?
Yeah, thanks. It's where we start, really, this question. Do you have a strategy for technology within your organization? Now, there are so many things to do when you are running a company. So you hire a CTO or a COO, and you have to look at all of these things over a long time, right? So in the past, you might have had a full-time IT manager. Now you don't, so a lot more of this strategy is perhaps left to you. You can't make decisions without understanding what you've got and what you might need in future. So if you haven't already mapped out your IT estate, and I say this all the time for reasons of cybersecurity and cyber essentials and GDPR things, understand what your enterprise actually looks like firstly, because managing change is a lot easier when you know what the pieces on the chessboard, if you like, actually are. So who's running Windows 10, who's running Windows 11, questions like that are what you would start with, at least. I think the dread phrase, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, springs to mind.
Absolutely. No, some really important points there and some considerations, and definitely the Windows 10, Windows 11, and potentially a new OS upcoming will be an interesting thing that perhaps we can explore a little bit later. So Rob, coming to you, I think what kind of, obviously with your experiences kind of day to day and working with IT teams, how are you seeing that kind of play out?
So I think if I build on what Rafi just said, because absolutely we have to know what we've got. The next stage is understanding what it's used for and how it's used and where it's used. You know, when we're talking about laptops, and the world and his dog moved to laptops at the beginning of lockdown, as you say, just over 3 years ago. And we've got a real mixture of what people bought and what they were able to buy. But also, you know, people use this stuff in different ways. Some people have got laptops and they're simply using them to carry them from the office home, whilst others are very much on the road, and they've been hammering their batteries for 3 years. And, you know, there's how are you using it? Where are you using it? What are you using it for? In terms of, if you've got someone who's got a machine and they're predominantly just browsing the web, then the performance of that machine isn't a consideration. So I think that's the next level, building on that first step that Rafi so rightly signposted.
So it's a really interesting point, and I think you kind of we look at technology as a very kind of anodyne, kind of one size fits all, but actually the usage of that technology, even during the pandemic and the kind of return to office, has differed massively. And I think that has a downstream impact in terms of other kind of components within that. So looking to you, Neil, I think, yeah, are there any kind of further kind of challenges you kind of see with that? Other considerations that people should make when it comes to just that identification and understanding how it's being used?
Yeah, I think, Elliot, I mean, everyone's going to have the right things to say here because we've all got the experience of the industry to comment. But I think the more deeper you go into the whole idea of do you upgrade or replace when you're talking about laptops, is you must look to upgrade where possible. Now, the problem is, does your organization know whether they should do that or not? There's a whole cost and budget justification, you know. But the irony, really, I think, is that if you need to know, like Rafi said, you need to know what you got, and whatever systems you may have in place as an enterprise organization, whether it's Microsoft based with their operational manager mum server, that or of old, a lot of people still have got the old versions of SMS and stuff for deployment and as well. They should give you the stats of what's installed and usage to a certain degree. So, but you need to be a large enterprise to have that, right? So if you haven't got that, you're reliant on your IT service provider and in-house IT. So I think it'll probably be more of a manual understanding for most out there, unless they've had huge budgets to have an operating system and that delivery system in place, But in all reality, furthering from Rob and Rafi, yes, I think personally, upgrade is always the way, and it's better for the planet, in a lot of ways, really. If you can more sustainable have your infrastructure and laptops, yeah, great. I think you just need a little bit of process and a bit of thought about who gets what, where, and when, and how, and have that plan. And I think upgrading will always work out cheaper if you put a bit of strategy behind it.
I just wanted to chip in. What do we actually mean when we're talking about an upgrade? What gets upgraded? What can you do? And I think there may be a gap because the ability to supercharge the performance of a particular endpoint device, it's actually quite surprising. It may be something where the machine was fairly useless. Let's say we're talking about consuming video. This is something where an underpowered piece of kit will really struggle, and the user will say, I can't use this at all. But really, there's a single point that could be fixed, such as the RAM, such as fitting an SSD rather than a spinning piece of tin, or upgrading to something as powerful as NVMe. I mean, we talked about NVMe in the ebook, and just what a step change in the capability of a device something just like that can give.
No, thank you, both Neil and Rafi on that bit. I think we will kind of come to some of the options that are available, but I think, like you say, Rafi, that I think the importance of kind of identifying the usage and the parameters around that, and I think it's fair to say that if you're using something that is kind of cloud intensive, but is kind of harder or older hardware, then actually it can, like, the benefits are there, but equally, if you're doing something that is quite data rich and intensive, I think there are also kind of values there, but we'll kind of come on to that. And no, thank you so much, Rob, as well for your insights. So I want to just share a poll question, just to kind of get the mood and really kind of understand amongst our audience. So whether people are considering buying new in quite I think it's fair to say, a tough market, wider economic forces, IT budgets reduced, or are they open to considering upgrading? So I'll leave that kind of open for 60 seconds or so, but I'll be really interested to get what our audience is currently kind of considering, and then perhaps we can kind of follow up towards the end to fully understand, okay, well, address some of the challenges and points, whether further poll or we do that through the Q&A section. But no, whilst we do that, we'll kind of touch on some of the upgrading options, and Rafi, you kind of mentioned SSD. Are there a kind of applications that organizations should consider for their employees that like if you're going through the process of upgrading, well, perhaps you should upgrade both memory and SSD, and other things. But from your perspective, is there kind of a sweet spot? What experience have you had in terms of whether people find upgrading memory versus SSD, and likewise, is there kind of a sweet spot there?
Is that for me?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah. So again, it's. I'll refer back to this sort of highly complex chessboard, right? So if we were playing a computer game, we got past the pandemic level, right? So about 3 years ago, we had this sort of big shock to the existing system, and that pushed a lot of the requirements out to the edge. I mean, I haven't used the desktop in a decade already, but I guess that's far more the case for more people now. The kinds of work, to get to the question, the kinds of work that people are doing, that's really changing. And if we can divide up the computational world into people that are just browsing, using cloud apps, maybe using Word or Excel, that kind of thing, that's 80% of people, let's say. What we're interested in is perhaps 20%, you could call them power users, and the kinds of people that this may be. It's growing because right across very many industry verticals, from healthcare to advertising, everything is becoming highly data centric. So it's very much about that 20% of users who are doing things with their kit that are business critical. That means they're linked to revenue. The way that I look at that is that the work that this person is doing is highly indexed to our ability to generate revenue.
Adding value, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm thinking about the things, I touch upon the advertising technology industry and startups of various stripes. And there are so many shops that are coding and rendering. If you are dealing with content of any kind, 3 years ago you were dealing with 1080p, now it's 4K. That really messes with workflows, in reality. The other thing is just to put a compliance overlay on top of this. And in a lot of cases, the compelling event that's going to make people really do something is a piece of legislation or something that's going to absolutely force you to change the way that you work. For example, a chipset, it may not support a given application. It may not support a given operating system. And in order to be compliant, you need to have the latest operating system, and that operating system needs to be patched. So again, I've thrown in a whole bunch of stuff that I hope Rob and Neil can comment upon, but The point is, it's a very, very complex, multi-dimensional chessboard. And to go back to the first point, you know, why are you doing this? And it's got to feed into your overall business strategy, I would say.
So thank you, Rafi. Really, really insightful. I think that there's some stuff there that definitely, given the subjects that we're going to cover, we look forward to kind of unpicking and kind of delving a little bit deeper. Rob, is that a fair statement? What are you saying your side? Is that concurrent? And what else are you kind of seeing in terms of where folks are kind of looking towards in terms of their options?
Yeah, no, of course it's a fair statement. I think it is worth saying that upgrading isn't always the right option. You know, and I don't think this is a chat just about upgrading. But upgrading is a really important consideration, because upgrading often is, and it can often make a big difference. To build on what Rafi was saying, I think there's a question about why are we upgrading? What is it that we're looking to achieve? And sometimes it's purely about performance. And do you know what? You know, putting more RAM in or upgrading to an SSD drive rather than, you know, a spinning drive will make any machine faster, no doubt, and, you know, improves the user experience. But if we're upgrading because we've got a new piece of software, is the other element. The compliance piece that Rafi was alluding to, in terms of, okay, our kit needs to meet these standards now because of whatever regulatory changes and things that we're doing in our security piece, then you've got to look at, it's not just about drives and memory. Does the motherboard support what we want to do? Is the chipset supported, and so on? So it's never a black and white answer.
No silver bullet.
Well, no, it's not. It's not. And you know, I never like to sit on the fence, but there's always a on one hand and on the other hand type response to this question, because it really depends what you're upgrading and why. Sometimes as well, and I think there is an element, sometimes there is the benefit of giving somebody a shiny new machine and the impact that that has on that person. And some people really, really value that, and others don't. Without doubt, where you can do upgrades, you know, it's been proven that there are massive cost savings by upgrading rather than replacing. But it's just not, just to clarify, it's not always the option that's going to be right for you and your organization.
No, that's fair, and I think it will be unwise for us to say that one suits all. And again, there are kind of further considerations, and very much it's important to kind of understand how or for what purpose and where it's driving value, and going down the technical route in terms of those applications and some of the other things that we'll touch on. But yeah, I think it would be very unwise in a world of people saying absolutes. Yeah, it depends, and I agree with you, Rob. It's not sitting on the fence. It's being pragmatic and being sensible in terms of like understanding how it's been used. So thank you, and Neil, just to kind of cover off, what are you seeing in your world, your experiences? What options, and have you had any kind of successes with upgrading or deploying new devices?
I mean, going back a few years, I was running the technology for quite a big bank in the UK, and you know, it was, you know, when you're talking about its agility and scale, right? So, you know, when you're looking at this daunting task of, oh my God, you know, I've got 500 laptops out there, you know, and half my staff have a company laptop. What the hell do I do with them? You know, when it comes to upgrading, because that's a scary thing, right? Because you think, oh, and then you get the customer support side of things in, well, certainly in the bank, we're saying, oh, my machine's running slowly and they're placing support tickets, and here we go. And then we would isolate and see what laptops, but then it all depends how long that they've been connected to the network. When was the last time they were even updated, right? You could force it to a lot of degree every time it comes online, updates, and then refreshes what I have on that laptop. And that's all dependent on whether you've actually used that laptop in that case, right? So you could have, out of 500, we had probably, I don't know, about a good 70 that hadn't been turned on for 2 years, right? And then you think, well, what do I upgrade that, right? Or do I have to replace that? I don't even know how it's been used today. So then, you know, Rob's right, Rafi's right. I think we all could be right in our own way, but it's just doing if you've got the systems in place to know what you've got, you can actually make an educated decision on where you should be, right? So if you don't really have an understanding of how your systems are used from a laptop point of view, then you'll really have no idea of when you should upgrade them, right? And that sounds a bit crazy, but it's true, right? Just because they're running slowly doesn't mean to say that they need upgrading or replacing.
No, I think it's a really good point, and kind of just circles back with what both Rob and Rafi were saying in terms of I think understanding rather than going, oh, one thing looks good, let's do that for everything. Like we're all sensible, critical thinkers in terms of what we're trying to do, but I think it is good to kind of take heed in terms of what is the current experience, what are the options available to us. Yes, there are some really good, strong advantages of upgrading. However, like you say, there's some other factors that the age of the device, again, something that we'll come to, alongside the necessity and how it's being used. And yeah, there's to Rob's point, yeah, not sitting on the fence. It's complicated because it's complicated, but the people taking the time and the cadence to go and understand how their device is being used, and then if there is an opportunity, well, there are great opportunities for cost savings that we'll again come on to. So I thought I'd just kind of share the outcome of the poll, and it's really insightful, actually. A lot of folks, and I wanted to, without assumptions, I think there's a lot of folks with the real kind of mix there. So equally, like 13% are either buying new laptops and desktops, and equally 13% are upgrading what we already have, which is really interesting. 25% neither, which is why, I mean, we stated that a lot of people were during the pandemic. However, it's not like laptops were suddenly invented in March 2020, that there is decisions have already been made, so that's fine. More interesting is the 50% that state that they have a mix of upgrading and new purchases, which, interesting enough, kind of aligns to what you, Rob, Rafi, and Neil are saying in terms of like that mix. So really interesting to see that amongst our audience. So thank you for sharing your opinions. So let me just move things on. So I think we can cover this quite briefly. And for this, I'll kind of look to Rob initially. Like I think the cost of upgrading versus buying new is quite clear. However, it is caveated with it's purpose. I mean, have you had any positive experiences with people upgrading, but equally, is there anything there in terms of going, okay, well, yeah, it made sense for people just to buy new?
Yeah, I think, and we've already talked about the purpose and why and so on and so forth. There's another reality in that the number of people who moved to laptops, we mentioned it earlier, 3 years ago, there was a massive supply problem at that point. And you've got a real mixture in the workplace, in organizations of all sizes. You've got a real mixture of kit that's out there, because some people were forced to buy top end and pay well over the odds in terms of what they would normally pay for a laptop, whilst others, their only option was to get really low spec because that was all that's available. And for a lot of those users, they've got machines that are still, you know, looking like new machines and in good condition and so on, and giving them memory and SSD drive upgrades is giving massive performance. And that you look at the cost of upgrading, you know, a dozen of those, that's probably the same price as buying a new laptop, which is very compelling. But it's the other things where people have got older machines or damaged machines, or you know, the keyboard's worn or the screen's damaged, or you know, the battery life is shot. Those are all going to be other reasons that feed in to the decision-making process. But also, actually, interestingly, availability today as well, because you could have a huge refresh project that you're dealing with as a CTO, and you just can't get enough stock. But you can get memory and drives, and all of a sudden you can deliver your project much quicker. So whilst availability impacted us 3 years ago, that's going to continue to be a factor moving forward.
No, that's a really interesting point. That again, it's kind of almost taken away from technology as being one entity, and it's quite challenging. Like, supply chains hit different parts of availability at different points. I think interesting to see that the availability of laptops back in March 2020, yeah, it was a huge challenge, but interesting to see, I think, with current challenges, the availability, because if you're not selling it, why make more? It does make, in one part, upgrading a compelling proposition, but it shouldn't come at the expense of sensible decision making. But interesting to see there are kind of opportunities. Again, it really kind of depends both on user experience and other components down the line. I think, Rob, you mentioned batteries as well. So yeah, really interesting. Rafael, keen to kind of get your thoughts on what Rob said, and
yeah, absolutely, very thought-provoking, because the real politic of actually rolling these things out, it's, you know, you as a CTO or IT manager, you've got your ideas about what you want to do and your understanding, and the CFO might say this isn't going to fly. So you have to make an argument for these things, as I say, strategically. It should be a long-term plan, and you need to think about, are these tasks, you know, we can be specific. Again, it is very nuanced, but if we're talking about something that requires a CPU that can do certain things, there's no amount of memory or hard drive space that's going to fix, you know, the fact that you bought something which has got a mobile phone processor because it was cheap, right? There were those laptops floating about with you know, basically a souped up phone chip. in those particular cases, you know, the unfortunate truth is that it might be more likely to replace. What we're here to do, I guess, with the audience that we've got that are interested in this question, is to tell people, yes, you can do more with upgrading than perhaps you thought, and to shift the needle towards that, not just because it's going to save money, but there's one thing that we mentioned right at the beginning, and that's the environmental impact of doing all of this. ESG, you know, from an investor, but all of the, you know, green computing, wanting to lower your footprint across the board. Upgrading is a brilliant way to reduce your company's footprint. You know, across an enterprise, you think about what it takes to bring 20 new laptops into the organization versus upgrading 18 and buying 2. I think the environmental impact, we all have to do our little bit. But again, what's going on in the wider trends of business is that businesses are trying, not for computational purposes or for strategic purposes, but for doing good business the right way purposes. And that's another way that you, as an IT manager, CTO, might be able to get the things done that you need done, but in a new way.
No, really interesting. No, that's I think looking and to coin your phrase just then, looking at new ways to get things done, I think is incredibly important. Neil, what are you seeing your side? And let's encompass some of the environmental kind of impacts within there, because again, I think ESG and sustainability is very important for decision making.
Yeah, I mean, from an ESG point of view, it just makes sense, you know, but you need to be, depends really where we're on that kind of journey, you know. It's like, how prepared are you to make that decision of upgrading rather than replacing? I keep coming back to it. Once you've identified what you have and what capacity that they can work under in your organization for any given person, I think you can make that decision very simply, right? It's not that difficult to do, but at the first instance, I would always say look at upgrading. At least look at the stats, right? And I used to have like a free iteration of it. We would actually sit down and go, right, we need to refresh, recycle, and then redistribute, right? So, and I put that as law in my IT team. It's like, this is what we do, right? And that was going back the 90s, you know, let alone the 2000s onwards. It just gained more momentum. And, you know, the fact is that people don't really understand why they're buying laptops unless they've got a proper justification of what's needed to be in that laptop for that inflated price, etc., etc. You know, well, what's that person going to use that for, you know? But, you know, for the people watching this, I'm sure the CTOs and CEOs, etc., get any laptop they only want, right? Let's be honest about it. It's the people that will do a lot of the work on there, either remotely or not. But, you know, at the end of the day, more services are cloud-based, we've got remote sessions going on all over the place, right, from a support and business app function. So, you know, and then you're also looking at a lot of cloud services you're getting pulled in now, that the actual footprint on the laptop, you'd think it would be less in all reality. But there's, you know, it depends. If I'm a video editor, I'm going to need a high-powered spec laptop, right? If we're a marketing company. If I'm in the bank and I've got some quant guys that take their laptops home rather than a desktop and 2 screens now, it's going to need pretty much, you know, as much as I can give him, you know. But, you know, good example for me personally, I mean, this laptop I'm using now, I have edit videos perfectly on this, and I bought this 5 years ago. You know, I've just upgraded the disk, put a bit more memory in, and to be honest, you know, the chipset's pretty good. It will go on for another 2.
No, that's really interesting, and I think it is a real challenge, and I think that obviously 5 years ago that more powerful chip has paid dividends. 3 years ago, as we've kind of touched on, that people were just getting what was available. Probably in some cases the CPU wasn't as powerful, or it was just a means to an end in terms of facilitate home working by hook or by crook, in terms of just getting there and enabling. But we're now 3 years down the line, and some serious considerations need to be made in terms of, okay, look, we've got, in some cases it will be kind of a mixed bag of ingredients, shall we call, and you do have to kind of consider all of those in terms of, okay, well, we've got all of these chipsets. Can we get to a point of kind of a relatively similar standard in terms of going forwards, but there are kind of further arguments in terms of okay, it might be more suitable for to replace, but again, the cost benefits of, if you can replace, both from an environmental standpoint and a cost standpoint, that's very clear. It's just advising people to fully understand what they're dealing with in order to achieve that. So yeah, really interesting. Yeah, thank you all. So I'm just going to move on to, because I'm just wary of time. So I think let's have a look at the maintenance and support, and I'll bundle in OS. We touched on it earlier, so a couple of questions, and yeah, but I think they are relevant in this case. Look, so us at Kingston, we have mentioned about the transition to Windows 11 have had some impacts in terms of technology, and if you do want to make that move, there are some prerequisites, but also the ongoing maintenance of support and actually deploying an upgrade program within your organization. So Rob, talk me through some of the experiences and what people should kind of look out for, both on a new OS upgrade and also delivering an upgrade program.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I mean, you said maintenance and support. In terms of maintenance, I often think that if a laptop is going to fail, it fails very, very early on in its life. I mean, typically kit is robust, and the you know, the more of an issue is wear and tear. If we're looking at upgrading OS, we've just got to make sure that the chipset supports what we're trying to do. Do we have compatibility? And of course, there are checks that you can run to ensure that and to tell you that. And if they do, then great. Let's do the upgrades and move people forward. Again, not everybody's going to do an OS upgrade every time there's an OS upgrade available. You've got to ask, and it's back to Rafa's very original point about having a strategy and understanding why we're doing this and what's to be gained and what are the drivers.
No, it's a very fair point. I think there has been a certain degree of reluctance for some parts for Windows 11, just because if it's not part of the strategy. But also people need to look out that with Windows 11 came a slew of technical requirements that they needed to adhere to, and there's a legitimate question if those laptops or devices or PCs were not kind of compliant. Well, but they're 2 years into their natural life cycle. Well, yeah, why would you kind of leap to it before you absolutely needed to? But I think that there's some I think it kind of comes round to that strategy kind of viewpoint. Rafi, anything else to kind of add to that? What you said earlier,
Yeah.
and Rob's comments as well.
Yes, perhaps unsurprisingly, yes, I've got something to say. I was just thinking it's not so much maintenance and support, it's again going back to the strategy thing and what that really is. So of course you've got a business strategy or an organizational strategy, but are you thinking, or are you having the conversation about what you think you're going to be doing as an organization in 2 years' time, and what that might imply in your mix of computational tasks? So example would be, we're going to bring marketing and design in-house. We're going to produce all of our videos and everything in-house because, hey, we've got these tools now that mean we don't have to pay an agency. We can use ChatGPT, we can do this, we can do that. So I like talking about what the future will bring because it's exciting, and it feeds into the reason why we're all interested in this is because we do amazing things with these pieces of kit. So what are you thinking about doing? I was reading just the other day about creating a private ChatGPT for your organization, which would involve feeding in all of your documentation, everything that exists in your organization into a large language model, and then being able to ask it questions about everything that your company has ever done and produced. That's a different kind of computational task. There's a lot of data that's going to have to be divvied up, stuck in vector databases and all that kind of stuff. So it's a different paradigm for computing. Have you thought about, again, not every organization is going to do this, but it's just an example of the kind of different computing paradigm that's coming into our daily lives that might mean that actually that piece of kit is not going to fly, or we're going to need 5 of these in 2 years' time, kind of thinking.
No, it's really interesting, and I think obviously the advent of AI models are advancing, and however, people at the same time are being super aware of the ramifications, because fundamentally it is this kind of black box that stuff comes in, outcomes come out, but what kind of happens in the middle, and that's probably driven the need for private cloud. But however, that does put pressure on on-premise computational power, and even localized computational power on laptops. Again, we shouldn't claim to be Nostradamus on this one. It could go several which ways, but it's an interesting development. I think that the fundamental principles that we should adhere to is kind of having that. This is where IT refreshes are useful because of their frequency, that people should be kind of frequently considering what not only the technology that they use, but how it is used, how it's adopted, and how it's going to be utilized within their organization, like you said earlier on, to add value to the organization. Neil, just wary of time, so I'm keen to get your kind of thoughts and considerations in terms of like what you've seen, your experiences, adoption of OSs, and how organizations can kind of strategize their maintenance and support, and kind of building that out, and be great to kind of learn about some of your experiences.
It's interesting because, you know, at the end of the day, I mean, we're all talking the same language really when we're talking about upgrading or replacing. It's just how we get there, you know, and how we get to that decision. But if you're looking from an enterprise level, you would expect that some kind of application deployment mechanism is in place, and then you have some kind of build server imaging or which scripting you're using for your builds. You have that in place already. And then how do you get that onto a laptop? And do you need to, or do you need to replace the laptop before that goes in? Now, the problem is that the builds are going to be all different depending on what type of role you have in that organization. If you're an enterprise, quite a larger enterprise environment. So yeah, you've got to do your due diligence on whether it is actually going to make any difference, for one. Two, what's the cost in it? Three, have you got all the details and necessity to understand it and to make that decision? And four, who's going to do it? Right? Because at the end of the day, it's physical changes to that laptop. Someone needs to undo that laptop and replace, configure, and then give it back to somebody. You know, there's loads of things, right? And you know, if you haven't got any of that in place, then flip a coin.
It's a very sensible point.
How much money have you got to spend, right?
Yeah.
That's, you know, do your research kind of vibe.
Exactly, and kind of bring everything to its kind of conclusion, that there are kind of wider factors that will, like, it's sensible and practical to for people to kind of consider the utilization, but there'll always be that kind of thing of commercial pressures, and I mean, you can't control the uncontrollable within the types of organisations that Kingston work with. All you can do is try and support and give the best advice to kind of do that. So before we kind of wrap things up and bring things to a conclusion, I just want to kind of touch on the kind of user experience, and I think the what we were saying a little bit earlier was really important, and we've actually had a question come in which we'll cover more in depth, but yeah, that argument of the new and shiny versus okay, that's good, and that's I'm not disregarding that in any way, shape or form, but also there are other considerations, user experience, where a user is getting frustrated because they are taking a device and their battery lasts half of what it was 3 years ago. Neil, what's just coming to you first? What's your kind of view in terms of the balance, in terms of, it's almost like wants and needs? Do you have any kind of insights and experiences in like the new and shiny versus, oh no, we the battery's not quite great, we may need to look at that?
What you mean from a user request that they wanted a new laptop, and
Yes,
then I
yes.
told them they couldn't. Yeah. Yeah, there's been quite a few of those. I mean, I can say it, I guess. You know, back in the day, you know, when you talk late 90s, early 2000s in the banking era, people would just go and buy them on their credit card, right? And then you had to try and work out to get that integrated into the bank in the IT system of our corporate network, you know. And half the time that people just bringing stuff in, right? And because people are just buying stuff and buying their own stuff, you know. And that was a bit of a concern because it's full of bloatware as it is, and then you've got to try and get the build on there. And if you didn't have that appropriate build, that's not going to work. And similarly now, in all reality, you know, when you've got, I mean, we are talking from an enterprise level point of view. You know, there are multiple build levels, right? There'll be multiple divisional desktop builds for the laptops, you know. I mean, and with layered applications. The problem is with all of that is if you replace, you know, typically, and there's a very well-known organization I'm not going to mention who does a lot of hardware in that space. You know, you'll find the chipset will be different, I mean, all sorts of things would be different, and then all of a sudden the build will be replaced and it won't work. Then you've got to do work on that to get that ready, you know. So it's a difficult thing, and that's what my big experience is. Early days when money was no problem, people will buy anything. Now more people will be more prudent about what we're going to be doing with our technology, and we should recycle and refresh, you know, and relocate to other people wherever possible. And I think personally, I mean, it needs to be an exceptional point of view to get a new laptop these days, rather than it's an easy thing to do. And I think we have to have that mindset, not just from a cost, but from a sustainability point of view. So, well, you keep buying stuff, you know. I personally have 3 old laptops in the house I just not got rid of, or got rid of the hard disks. And I should, you know, it's no good to me, but I mean, someone could probably do some. If anyone wants to buy them out there, contact me. Said more than welcome to. Because they're only cluttering up there. Yeah, answers on a postcard, as they say.
I'll, yeah. I was going to use Del Boy, but it might, given the international audience, they may not fully understand. But
Yeah.
no, really interesting points. Just because I've got a couple of minutes left. So Rob, Rafi, start with you. Rob, is how are you seeing that overall? What's your experience there?
I really think user experience means different things to different people, because for some people, if you if you ask them the magic wand question, so if you had a magic wand, what would you do differently about IT? For some people, it's just going to be, look, I just want my machine to be faster, or I want the boot up time to be faster, or whatever. For those people, that user experience, it's so easy to deal with in terms of upgrade. For others, the tech that they've got and having the latest Chinese piece of kit is really important to them, and it's important to their image, and they, you know, associate it with status or whatever. User experience for those people will be different, and I don't think, we've said it already today, I don't think it's a one size fits all solution. The most important thing is that we work out what it is that we need tech to do within our organization, and how do we effectively do that within an agreed budget, allowing people to do what they need to do as efficiently as possible.
That's a really good really good point. And again, it's that needs versus wants kind of scenario, and does that align with adding value for an organization? Just quickly, Rafi, is
yeah,
that,
I know
do you
we've
have
got to
any?
be. I know we've got to be quick. So yeah, absolutely agree with that. And I think it's about really understanding your users with a certain degree of cynicism. So if someone says, "Oh, I'm a bit annoyed because it's a bit slow," you know, okay. But is that person part of your customer support team? Are there 25 people like this answering calls and dealing with customers? And is a customer's user experience, therefore, impinged by the fact that this piece of kit is running slow? Okay, so there's a big difference, because your customer experience, you may deem that to be actually of, right, if that's in trouble now because of the technical limitations of the kit, that feeds into your revenue, that feeds into your reputation. The value of the change is really, really, really high, rather than saying, yeah, the keyboard's a little bit dodgy, we're not, you know, we're going to replace it because the escape key's fallen off, right? We've just got to reach a point where we can really understand the multiple dimensions of what's going on with technology, what's going on with computation, what's going on with the business, what's going on with compliance. Again, it's multidimensional, it's complex, and as Rob said, you know, do you upgrade or you replace? Well, it depends. And that nuance is really what I hope we've been able to delve into today.
Thank you so much, Rafi. I think, but yeah, these are all kind of considerable points. So just before we kind of wrap things up, and I'll touch on the question, one of which we've already answered. But yeah, how can Kingston help? So obviously, we have SSDs and memory that can really kind of, for those that are looking towards upgrading their existing system. So we have our KC3000, which is your high performance, high workload workhorse that can really kind of make a difference in terms of your data intensive applications. But also for those that are running cloud-led applications that need a boost in performance, we have the MV2, both of which come with up to 4 terabytes. So whatever you need, that's we have something for you. So then we have the Kingston configurator. So whether it's memory or SSD, and the devices that you can use, you can search by model and understand what options are available to you. So hugely important when it comes to that kind of strategy element and understanding, okay, what can we do with what we have available by the device. So super important. And then lastly, how are we best kind of placed to support partners? So whether it's upgrading your existing systems on a corporate environment, data center applications, and also kind of designing acute manufacturing, we have a solution that covers you, and it's underpinned by our Ask an Expert service, which we have a team here that depending on your need and what you're looking to do, we have that available. So that's really really useful. Hopefully that's kind of covered some of the try to intertwine some of the questions that we were getting in. For those that and I think there was one around we are kind of 18 months into our purchasing laptops. Is it advantageous? Yes, but it depends. For the reasons that Rafi, Neil, and Rob have kind of said that there's no point adding extra for the sake of extra, but it might be worthwhile considering what the future brings. And now that we're in a position where SSD and memory is at quite a low price point, it might be wise to consider it. However, that shouldn't go across what you're trying to do as an overall strategy. So just to kind of close things and round things out, so I think one thing I wanted to kind of conclude things is that okay, the kind of most important points that we should be considering: understanding how you're using your IT assets, understanding what the current challenges are, and also looking ahead as to what you will need in the future, and then obviously coming up with a plan to go and deliver that. Rafi, anything else to add to that as a summary point?
No, I think that's a great summary. Hopefully, as I said, today was a session with purpose, and the purpose is to understand the landscape. It's a highly complex landscape. It's very context dependent. Hopefully what we've done is given people that are on the call an idea of what the right questions should be. The answers, that's another thing. But when you're finding out what to do, having a broader base of information, a more complete landscape of what you know and so forth, it's hopefully going to lead to better decisions for everyone through the organisation.
Perfect. Rob, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the only other two elements that you didn't say in your wrap up is that compliance piece and that final element that I mentioned in terms of availability as well.
Perfect. Thank you, Rob. Neil, make it big.
Well, I've always liked Kingston as a provider for memory and storage. So, you know, my history with Kingston goes back decades. So, you know, and I know about, and I'm a big advocate of your consultancy service, which is free. I might add. Well, it used to be. I hope it is.
It still is. Yeah.
And you know, you could phone somebody up and say, look, I've got this config, this is what I'm going to do, that's the best memory configuration that you have at the certain speeds that I need, and I'd get it instantly back, and it'd be cheaper, right, if I'd have bought from you anyway. So yeah, so I love the way that, and I think personally going forward, if Kingston had a laptop refresh service, that I never had to buy a laptop again, but you know, you take on obviously the control of the laptop and lease it to a large corporates, but then you've got all of the gubbins that you can upgrade yourself. I think that's a great business model.
I'll put it in the owner's suggestion, but
Yeah.
however, there is legitimately just a final point. I think as a service and that kind of leasing model, they're still looking for upgrades. Obviously, although the business model is slightly different, the methods in terms of so long as the CPU can kind of, and we kind of touched on this briefly, so long as the CPU can adopt and be pliable to cope with the needs of business today, then yeah, it's a massive advantageous point to upgrade that, and it kind of shifts the model just out and out leasing, but also considered leasing with environmental plus strategic viewpoints considered. So thank you. We're way out of time, but thank you for those that have stuck around. We hope that it's been useful. I've certainly learned a lot, and I thank Rafael, Rob, and Neil for contributing. Their expert thoughts and minds have been hugely impactful, and yeah, thank you, and thank you to the audience for sticking around, and hopefully you've learnt something by our well-considered experts. So lastly, thank you so much for joining, and like I say, thank you to our team of experts. We hope to see you again, and we'll send out follow-up emails for those we can ask questions, and we hope to see you again. But yeah, have a lovely day, and we'll see you again soon.